Hi everyone, it's John. I am back with you today for a review of a history book by someone that I've never read before up until a few months ago. Someone I've always wanted to read simply because of the novelty of the thesis of the books that he's most known for. And also to some extent the provocative nature of that thesis. If you're not familiar with him, let me show you the book first. The book is Same-Sex Unions in Premodern Europe, and the historian is John Boswell. John Boswell spent most of his career, I believe, at Yale University. He died very, very early, at the age of 47, in 1994, I believe, of AIDS. He is most known for carving out a space in historiography in a book that he published in 1980, suggesting that homosexuality and the cultural acceptance of homosexuality might have been actually much wider and broader, the acceptance, that is, wider and broader than we ever would have imagined back in the Middle Ages. And that it was only with the onset of the Renaissance and early modernity that homosexual practices became more and more frowned upon and pushed to the sort of the edge of I guess social things that are socially accepted sexual practices. And I'll talk about the book that he wrote, but this sort of created a little space for other historians to go in and sort of ask similar questions about sexuality, about the church, about what was commonly accepted. We think of the medieval times as being one of witch-burning, superstition, a lot of things we would like to think we've gotten away from in modernity. But if his thesis is true, it's got a lot of interesting things to say about what they also accepted nearly 1,000 years ago. So it's a fascinating book. This is the book that was published by him, the fourth book on that subject. Published by him in, I believe it was 1993, the year before he passed away. And I wanted to talk about it a little bit today. So, having previously published 3 other books on the subject of same-sex unions in medieval Europe, this was, like I said, his fourth and last, published in 1994. In these books, he makes the cumulative argument that, counter to many modern ideas about the reception of homosexuality in the Catholic Church. Remember, the Catholic Church was the Protestant Church was not around back then, so I'm just talking about Catholicism. That as late as the 12th century, clergy showed basically no particular concern or disdain towards homosexual practice or homosexual couples, and even openly celebrated same-sex unions. Pretty interesting thesis, right? In many ways, this book is a culmination of Boswell's academic work on the subject that he began nearly 15 years earlier with his equally known 1980 publication, quite a bigger book than this, called Christianity, Social Tolerance, and Homosexuality, Gay People in Western Europe from the Beginning of the Christian Era to the 14th Century. Again, published in 1980. Boswell opens this book, Same-Sex Unions, claiming that this kind of research is made particularly difficult for philological and cultural reasons. For example, similar words were often used for a variety of different ideas, different reasons. For the Greek words agape Storgia, philia, and eros all speak to distinctly different kinds of love, but their usages are often idiomatic and overlap. To complicate matters even further, what marriage entailed varied widely from one geographic location to another, even within Europe. This is one of the reasons why Boswell tries to avoid the term gay marriage, thinking it's too politically charged, and opts for another term. He uses the term brother making, or the Greek equivalent, which is extant in many of the documents that he's looking at, which is adelphopoiesis, which means brother making or brother creation. Though he finally settles on adelphopoiesis, it's important to realize that the meaning of brother was also far from static. Recall that the Bible claims that all Christians are, quote-unquote, brothers with one father, but that term is also used in medieval economic and juridical contexts as well, to the highly idiosyncratic ways in which we use the word today in contemporary English. So words and their usage are a bit slippery when you're looking at these difficult concepts so long ago. He then drives home the point that historical motivations for marriage highly diverge from the ones that we all but assume today. In Europe, for example, it was common to marry for dynastic and economic reasons and to keep a separate female companion for the, shall we say, release of the baser pleasures, or perhaps even male companions. As Boswell says, quote, "There is nothing in the ancient world that quite corresponds to the idea of a permanent exclusive union of social equals, freely chosen by them to fulfill both their emotional needs and imposing equal obligations of fidelity on both partners." End quote. The appearance and popularization of Christianity in the late classical and early medieval periods didn't do as much to change sexual ethics as is usually claimed. Most of these changes occurred before Christianity did, and if anything, Christianity devalued marriage in a sense by emphasizing its role as a worldly and therefore as an inferior relationship. The sacralization of marriage didn't occur until the heightened emphasis on biblical passages like Ephesians 5:22, wherein Jesus is compared to the church in exactly the same way as a man is seen as the figurehead of a marriage. Because influential commentators from Augustine to Isidore of Seville suggested that chaste marriages are preferable to unchaste ones, the Christian standard quickly became the spiritual marriage, which focused on a unity of souls rather than physical earthly traits like attraction. This, combined with the fraternalization of the Christian community, repeated references to fellow Christians as brothers and sisters, leads to some highly interesting readings in which sisters or wives or brothers or husbands are almost synonymous, as seen again in the Bible, in the book of Tobit and the Canticorum. Boswell goes on to talk about documents in which these ceremonies occurred, and the descriptions of the ceremonies are described. He talks about the joining of hands, the crowning of heads, super gay, by the way, the taking of communion, the readings from Scripture, all of which we know to be central parts of many medieval heterosexual marriage ceremonies. Was this, in fact, something more profound or meaningful than the formation of a spiritual brotherhood? Was it anything like a marriage between people of the same sex. If it was, do we have any reason to think that other people in society looked upon these kinds of marriages as anything like normative heterosexual marriage? These are more interpretive questions, and therefore almost necessarily must have less conclusive answers. But Boswell certainly wants to encourage the reader to believe that they probably were accepted to be precisely that, at least in the church. He doesn't talk about the wider community as much. Even if Boswell's project turns out to be little more than just a bit of wishful thinking, his is the only scholarship I've ever read on this particular subject, but there are dozens more that you could choose from. What he's added to the field has encouraged historians to rethink narrow presentist assumptions about religion and larger cultural questions about who knew what, who accepted what, and when they accepted it. The evidence that the book puts forward may or may not fully support the claims that it makes, but it opens interpretive doors that make it much easier to imagine just how fluid and organic the past, present, and future really are. If this book is any sole indication, Boswell almost certainly did not make his case fully, but he may well have achieved something much more important in choosing to investigate what was thought to be long-settled social and cultural history. And for that, for any serious historian, would and should be considered a first moral imperative of writing history. So if you are interested in the subject, this is, again, as I said, one of 4 books that John Boswell wrote, and the subject is covered by many other historians since he has uncovered the topic. This is Same-Sex Unions in Premodern Europe by John Boswell. Leave me any notes or comments if you have read about it or heard about it, or it strikes your fancy. I will see you next week. Bye.